Welcome to Spiritual Psychology. My name's Renee LaValle McKenna, and I bring my 30-plus years as a recovering addict and ex-crazy person turned therapist and shamanic healer to bring you snackable teachings on spirituality, psychology, and all things personal growth. And today I want to talk about functional and dysfunctional relationships. And although we each have our own unique way of relating with or interacting with others, and each relationship that we have is its own unique configuration, if we look deeply at our relationships, we'll often see patterns, and some of those patterns are hopefully healthy and fulfilling, and some of them, for sure, feel unhealthy and dysfunctional. And that's true for all humans. And it's pretty easy to tell the difference between the healthy and the unhealthy, or the functional and dysfunctional ones, because our healthy relationships are generally easy. They don't have any drama. They make us feel good. Healthy relationships add to our life and support our best, most authentic self in the world. Dysfunctional or unhealthy relationships generally cause us a lot of pain and suffering. They might cause us anxiety, resentment, and they might make us feel burdened, obligated, or depleted. And the great value of our feelings is that they give us direct information about what's happening. Although our mind and our ego might have all kinds of stories or narratives about what it wants, our feelings are connected with deeper truth. It's why a lot of people medicate their feelings. Certainly why I did. There was a big misalignment between how I felt and how I wanted things to be. And optimally, perhaps even the goal, is to have our mind and our emotions in alignment. But for much of my life, I really distrusted or even hated my feelings, and I just medicated those motherfuckers and tried to just run my life by self-will. Didn't go so good, and an enormous part of my personal growth work and becoming a more functional person has been about making friends with my feelings, and to listen, or learn to listen, and interpret the deeper desires and needs and even wisdom of my own soul self, which I didn't even know existed for a huge part of my life. But we all have one, our own wise self, and I think spiritual practice, good friendship, helpful therapy, and coaching or mentorship can all help us to get in touch with our own deeper truth. And for most of us, our relationships, particularly the intimate and the problematic ones, and those might not be the same thing, give us tremendous information about our own function or dysfunction. Relationship is our teacher, and the difficult relationships that we have, or the difficulties in relationship, are almost always a powerful catalyst for our own growth and evolution. Now, most of the time, if we're in a problematic relationship, we focus on all the places that the other person needs to grow and evolve. If you would only be different, my life would be better. And although that's a very normal, human, and understandable perspective, it keeps me in a position of powerlessness and unmanageability, because the deeper truth is that I am powerless over other people. Doesn't mean I don't have influence on them. I know I've certainly used a lot of my life energy to control and manipulate and quote-unquote influence others, because if they would only act the way that I think they should act, then I would feel much better. Even when I think I know what's best for other people and try to get them to do that, it's generally self-serving in some way. And I have come to see that I really don't know what's best for other people, and it's much more effective for me to focus on what's actually good for me. A lot of times I don't even know what that is. Like the Serenity Prayer teaches us, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And generally, the only thing I really can change is myself. And when I change myself in positive and constructive ways, it does have an influential changing effect on those I'm engaged with. But when I'm focused on being healthy, grounded, kind, and loving, when I feel good within myself, it matters less and less how other people behave. And I also become less and less likely to be embroiled in dysfunctional psychic battles with others that ultimately make me unhappy. And again, for most of us, we focus on what other people are doing wrong and what we think we're doing right, rather than what's actually more helpful, which is to look at what I'm doing wrong and focus on cultivating the skills and abilities to be more functional in my own life. Now, I love this idea that we always have 3 choices in any circumstance or relationship. We can accept it as it is, we can ask for change, or we can remove ourselves. And the asking for change part is not always about asking the other person to change, although sometimes it is. Each of those 3 options is really about the empowerment of self-responsibility, choice, and being able to make change for ourselves, whether that change is to grow in acceptance, to create actual change in ourselves and others, or to get out of Dodge. Many years ago, I actually spent a week in Dodge City, Kansas, where the phrase "get out of Dodge" comes from. It's a kind of desolate place, although the people there are lovely. The main employer is a slaughterhouse. Yikes. Population of Dodge City is about 27,000. And they actually do say, at least some of the people I met, that they would like to get out of Dodge. And I don't blame them. Although my week there was actually a lot of fun. We were visiting a really interesting friend who builds sprint cars. That's a kind of little race car. I ultimately was not sad to leave, or at least I was glad that I could get out of Dodge. So the most important thing to know about the problematic relationships in our life is that we are part of them. And although on a personality level, we can't imagine that we might choose the parents or siblings, or maybe some of the core circumstantial relationships that might cause us the most difficulty, on a soul level, the circumstances of our birth and early life are definitely not a coincidence. At least that's my perspective. And if you want to learn more about that, you can check out episode 48, Karma and Family of Origin. I'm actually putting together a workshop on ancestral healing at some point, but that's a completely different topic. But from the perspective of functional and dysfunctional relationships, I find it most helpful to move out of a place of victimization and take the perspective or the self-responsibility that on some level, I maybe even chose to be here so that I could learn and grow. And the most painful relationships in my life have absolutely been my greatest teachers. And if you're struggling with dysfunction in intimate or romantic relationships, particularly if you're feeling victimized by them, I'm going to take a minute and call bullshit and say, you volunteered to be here, honey. And that's not about blame or shame. It's just plain true. And when I can own that and be curious about it, then all kinds of interesting and hopeful possibilities open up. And I know many times I have felt hopeless, stuck, imprisoned even, in difficult, painful, even destructive relationships. But ultimately that stuckness was actually mine, generally rooted in fear of change, fear of the unknown, fear of hurting the other person, fear of telling the truth, 100 forms of fear. And this is the value of pain, actually, that the suffering of the dysfunction itself will often become so unbearable that it forces us to face our fears, to change, evolve, to step back into the stream of life in a more functional and fulfilling way. Pain is information that something needs attention, healing, or readjustment. Joy, peace, and fulfillment let us know we're going in the right direction. It's life's little treat or affirmation that we're doing the right thing, following the flow of our own soul path, however that works. So the bad news, or at least the ego-deflating news, is that if I'm in a dysfunctional relationship, it means I'm dysfunctional. Sorry, there's no way around that. Takes 2 to tango. Ooh, I just got these old platitudes flowing out of me today. So the only way to heal a dysfunctional relationship is to become functional myself. I know I've spent a lot of time trying to make the other person functional, thinking it's them, but truly the courage to change the things I can is almost entirely about changing me. Now that doesn't mean that the other person is not dysfunctional, and sometimes the change is really being honest about the other person's issues, and that I need to be with what is rather than what I wish or want to be. to be with the practical experience I have in the relationship rather than the potential or the fantasy of what it could be if everything went the way that I would like it to be. I think about my very first boyfriend. Good-looking, very cool, kind of bad boy type. Love those bad boys. And in the early part of our relationship, he was very charming and sweet when he wanted to have sex with me. But the rest of the time, he didn't treat me very well at all. In fact, he could be outright abusive. And I was so starving for the crumbs of his affection and devastated when he was a jerk that I focused all my energy and fantasies on the 10% of the time he was nice to me and was completely distraught over the other 90% that actually made me feel lousy. It wasn't a very good ratio, and it took me kind of a long time to get fed up. And I finally broke up with him. The pain to pleasure ratio wasn't working for me anymore, and he actually begged me to come back. I couldn't believe it. And he had a complete change of heart and treated me nice for the rest of the time we were together. Of course, I was kind of a train wreck at that time, and the dynamic just completely flipped, and I actually became the abusive, emotionally unavailable one. I talk about that victim-perpetrator being two sides of the same coin in another episode, number 164, Disconnecting from Difficult People. So what's the difference between functional and dysfunctional relationships? And the simple answer is pain, and pain can include anger and resentment, fear, anxiety, feeling drained or overburdened, unsupported, unfulfilled, unloved. Just about anything is dysfunction. Unwanted, unimportant. If it's got an un in it, is a problem. Same thing with over. If you feel over-responsible, overwhelmed, overworked. Extremes are great if they feel good, but if they're not feeling good, they point to dysfunction. And functional relationships are usually the ones that are just chugging along. You don't think about them very much. It's like a machine or a car. You start it up and it does what it's supposed to do. That's functional. If it doesn't start or doesn't get you where you want to go, then there's a problem. It's usually pretty obvious. And the bad news is, if you're in a dysfunctional relationship, it's your dysfunction. And the good news is, when we can take responsibility for that, there's all kinds of things we can do about it. And the best thing we can do, or at least the best place to start, is to get honest about our own dysfunction rather than redoubling our efforts in trying to get the other person to change. Because if I'm spending my time wishing or willing someone else to change, it actually points to my own unwillingness to change, which is actually a little bit unfair. And the shortcut, I love shortcuts, to knowing which of the three choices to choose when seeking change in relationship, acceptance, creating change, or removing myself, the shortcut question to ask ourselves is, if I accept that this person is exactly how they're supposed to be, if I really accept that it's unlikely that they will change, can I love them just the way they are? Or can I work with them, cooperate with them, interact with them, whatever the dynamic of the relationship is? Because although I have dedicated my life to helping people change, most people are not interested in actually being different in the world. Generally, we're only willing to change when the suffering that we're in the circumstance outweighs the fear of the unknown that we're being called into. We all have a natural resistance to change, even when it's in our best interest. It's kind of a design flaw. But again, that's the value of difficulty and suffering, is that it will push us back into the stream of life. It's always helping us to grow and evolve, whether we're trusting that process or not. So I can't offer you the specific solution to your unique suffering in any circumstance, but I can tell you that you absolutely have the power to relieve that suffering within yourself when you can take the time and put in the effort to get honest and take responsibility for your own dysfunction and gather the resources, abilities, and skills needed to make those positive, constructive changes in your own life. And the best way to create change in others is to change ourselves. And if you want a crash course in that, you might attend a couple of open meetings of Al-Anon for friends and families of dysfunctional relationships, or Codependence Anonymous, both 12-step fellowships about looking at our own dysfunction and getting power and community support to make evolutionary change in our own life. both free and high-quality resources available pretty much every day now on the internet. Thank you so much for listening. If you like this podcast, I'd appreciate 5 stars or a good review. Check out all my free offerings on Insight Timer, fabulous app offering lots of free workshops, excellent audio recordings, and all kinds of great stuff. Just released my 10-session course on healing trauma. I'm getting really excellent feedback. One recent participant posted that the healing trauma course was the best experience ever. Beautiful, strong, loving, and emotional, and they are forever thankful. I'm so glad, Line, that you are having a really positive healing experience. And there's a link to do that really powerful healing trauma work yourself in the show notes. In fact, I'm doing a short transforming trauma workshop this Wednesday, March 29th, on Insight Timer, 3 p.m. Eastern, noon Pacific, 8 p.m. GMT. Deep gratitude to my supporters on Patreon and through this podcast. Blessings on your path until we meet again. This is Renee LaValle McKenna for Spiritual Psychology.